Hi there, this is Power and Politics. I'm David Cochrane in Ottawa. In just 2 weeks, millions of Canadians go to the polls, and these next few days could prove critical to the party leaders vying for their vote. 5 of them will face off this week in a pair of televised debates. But before they make that pitch directly to voters, those leaders are rolling out more of their plans for the country. And Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says he would override the Charter in order to crack down on crime. Reaction is just ahead. And Liberal leader Mark Carney is apologizing for what he calls unacceptable behavior after some Liberal staffers planted fake campaign buttons at a Conservative event last week. Well, this incident hurt Carney's bid for office. This is day 23 of the election campaign, and Power and Politics starts right now. And we have got the Power panel standing by to weigh in on all of the latest election developments. And we're going to start with the Conservative campaign, as leader Pierre Poilievre doubled down on a controversial policy pitch today. Poilievre was in Montreal this morning saying he would use the notwithstanding clause to ensure people convicted of multiple murders never get parole.
The worst mass murderers should never be allowed back on our streets. For them, a life sentence should mean what it says, a life sentence. They should only come out in a box.
Currently, people convicted of first-degree murder in Canada are ineligible for parole for 25 years. The CBC's Catherine Tunney has more on this. Catherine.
David, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is renewing his vow to use the controversial notwithstanding clause to get part of his tough-on-crime agenda through. The leader once again harkened back to the Stephen Harper era, promising to use the charter clause to resurrect a law that gives judges the power to sentence people who have been convicted of multiple murders to back-to-back life sentences. The law was struck down by the Supreme Court in 2022, with the country's top court calling those types of consecutive sentences incompatible with human dignity. To get around that, Poilievre says he will use the notwithstanding clause, which allows the government to override charter rights and prevents a judicial review of the legislation in question. It's not the first time Poilievre has made this promise. He was questioned today, though, by reporters whether he respects the Supreme Court and if he'd use Section 33 to reverse other decisions he doesn't agree with. And to that, Poilievre says he'd use the notwithstanding clause when it comes to fighting crime, a relatively broad aspect of the law. Liberal leader Mark Carney called Poilievre's proposal a dangerous step. If he gets the chance to follow through, Poilievre would become the first Canadian Prime Minister to override charter rights by invoking the notwithstanding clause. David?
All right, Catherine, that's the CBC's Catherine Tunney in Montreal. And the other party leaders are condemning Poilievre's plan to use the notwithstanding clause.
I think this is a very dangerous step. We have a charter of rights and fundamental freedoms in this country. And it's the responsibility, in my view, of the Prime Minister, of the Government of Canada to defend that charter.
Charter rights, human rights should not be things that we are willing to ignore or put to the side. And I'm worried that it's becoming more and more commonplace that the notwithstanding clause is being used.
When you are in the position of a person that wants to be Prime Minister of Canada, you should rely more on improving justice system and laws than removing yourself from their application.
Okay, let's bring in the Power panel. We're going to start there with them. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister, and here with me in the studio, Jonathan Kalis, former Quebec advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Jordan Leiknitz is a former NDP strategist, and Rob Russo is the Canada correspondent for The Economist. Good to see you all. 2 weeks left to go. Lisa, let's start with you. I don't know if the people criticizing Mr. Poilievre are coming down on the side of mass murderers, but they have an anxiety about using the notwithstanding clause in this way. How do you see this? I mean, Pierre Poilievre may be right on the politics here, if not right on the policies, sort of the criticism of him. How do you think this one plays?
I think it's going to get the attention of the Canadian public. Look, in a country where we have experienced mass murders, I don't think this is a terrible thing to say, that we want to make sure that whatever punishment deterrence that we can put in place isn't artificially, in my opinion, put in terms of how long a person can serve a sentence, quite frankly. And I don't have a problem whatsoever, David, with saying that people should have back-to-back sentences when they commit atrocities, like has happened in the mosque in Quebec City or has happened on the streets in Toronto. You know, you can put your defense up in the court of law and you can be found guilty, but the sentencing with respect to multiple murders should be back to back. That's what we believed in when we first passed it before. And if the notwithstanding clause is there for utilization in order to ensure that Canadians are protected from these kinds of things, then it should be put in play and it should be utilized. And I say good on Pierre for indicating that's what he would do.
John, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, it's this whole question where we talk about a slippery slope. Like, is this going to open the door to other uses of the notwithstanding clause? That's what we're hearing from the other opposition leaders. And the worry is you're going to use it for whatever is the populist idea of the day, where you want to pass a law, you have that power. The Constitution is there to create some limits, that there's some consistency. And yes, it exists. The power exists to be used, but it's there to be used exceptionally, and not like it's starting to become like this tool that you can use if you don't like what a judge decides. And that's where it becomes dangerous. And you notice the hypocrisy about Yves-François Blanchet saying he's really concerned about this use for criminal justice, but he clearly doesn't have a problem when it's being used for Bill 21 or Bill 96 or any other language laws or secularism laws in Quebec. Again, my issue there is you're picking and choosing. These are serious decisions to start to say, well, this part of the Constitution, the Supreme Court, we don't agree with their interpretation, so we're going to override it. That's the slippery slope.
So Jordan, the allegation has been against the Conservatives, throughout elections. They might use this for social issues and social rights, but Mr. Poilievre, that's never been part of his politics. He has made it very clear that this is exclusively something he would use in issues of law and order, because he thinks essentially the system has gotten too easy on people. Is that a reassuring message to people, do you think?
No, and I think that, frankly, there's material problems with this proposal, and John talked about a number of them, and there's political problems with this proposal for the Conservatives. And, to speak to the issue at hand here, look, Scott Moe didn't initially campaign saying that he was going to consider using the notwithstanding clause against trans kids. Doug Ford didn't campaign saying he was going to use the notwithstanding clause to try to crush labor rights in Ontario. So I think that Canadians could be forgiven for viewing those kinds of commitments with skepticism when you have somebody who's going out there and saying right off the bat that they're willing to use the notwithstanding clause, our Constitution's most powerful tool, in order to go back on a Supreme Court decision on something that the Supreme Court had declared effectively cruel and unusual punishment. And look, I think that when you are considering some of the problems facing the Conservative campaign right now, one of the biggest ones that they face is that Pierre Poilievre is appearing Trumpy. He's appearing Trump-like to people. And so going out and making tough-on-crime announcements that mimic United States Republican three-strikes style laws, I don't think it's a very smart move for him. This is going to be exciting for people in his base, but I don't think he's going to find a lot of new followers here.
But Rob, there has been a frustration with the bail system, with the justice system, with repeat criminal offenders, and I know extreme mass murderers, they become eligible for parole, right? They don't get parole,
I think there is legitimate frustration with the way the bail system works, not because people aren't told that they should be under arrest, but because there isn't the capacity, it seems, to go out there, find them and arrest them and bring them in. I think Catherine Tunney alluded to this, and I ran into the peerless Stephanie Levitt. She reminded me of this as well. Mr. Poilievre made this promise in 2022. Yeah. He repeated it last summer when he told an audience that he was prepared to use a notwithstanding clause for this. Even though there is a problem with the bail system, how many mass murderers are running around Canada? How many have been released? Anybody?
I'm going to say zero?
Yes.
Yeah, that would be my guess, yeah.
So the question then is, why now? If he said this before, why is he doing it now? What's the reason for it? The reason is political, clearly. He wants to wedge his rival, principal rival, in Mr. Carney, and looking like he's defending mass murderers. But as Jordan said, the language of hug a thug, carry him out in a box, all of this stuff, it reminds people of the issue that he shouldn't want to remind people of. The echoes of Trump are there. In terms of the use of the notwithstanding clause, it's there. there was an NDP premier, Alan Blakeney from Saskatchewan, Sterling Lyon from Manitoba, who really insisted on this, and Pierre Trudeau agreed to the use of the notwithstanding clause. He didn't like it, but it's there. But to use it in this particular instance is, it looks like it's purely political, and it could backfire politically because of the echoes of Trump, I think.
So Lisa, your thoughts on that, right? The 3 strikes and you're out policy that he announced last week as well. There was some political criticism that is a little bit like, certainly the 3 strike laws are a U.S. Conceit, right? That he's sort of copying there. Do you see a political risk in this looking too much like the president?
No, it's something we've been saying for the longest time, and I know that in my community, especially in and around the 905, crime is a real issue. Citizens are taking it in their own hands to hire outside security firms. They're putting cameras all over the place. Their cars are being stolen. You can't get insured. And I know that I'm not necessarily talking about mass murders here, but crime is prevalent and it is something in people's minds. And when these atrocities happen with mass murders, it is something that needs to be taken seriously. And some parts of our society do want to make sure that the individual who does that never gets out of jail again. And there's no way to guarantee that at the moment, unless you have these back-to-back sentences that are available. And you know, Pierce didn't say he's going to do it for everything. He said he's going to do it specifically for these kinds of mass murders. And I don't think it's a bad thing to put it out there that you take these matters seriously.
But Lisa, just to follow up on that, is for example, the other policy he announced on like cracking down on fentanyl traffickers, calling for life sentences for what would be a very small amount of drugs for non-fentanyl. I appreciate the lethality of fentanyl makes, you know, even a modest volume quite deadly. But that is something that may also be unconstitutional, a lot of people have said, right? That these strict life sentences. I mean, it feels like for a lot of the law and order agenda, he might have to use this beyond just multiple and mass murders.
You know, you're asking hypothetical questions. We don't know the answers to any of that. But what I do know is that the best that we can do in terms of making sure people are safe and that people's families aren't poisoned by fentanyl is to make sure that people who deal in fentanyl are punished severely so that there is no incentive for them to try to push this kind of business in Canada and make sure that we're protecting Canadians. And I really think that families understand that, especially if you've had the unfortunate circumstance of having somebody succumb to fentanyl poisoning.
Jonathan, just on this, you know, Rob suggests that this is a wedge against Mr. Carney in the run-up to the English language and the French language debates. Amy, if it's a wedge, how do you think the Liberals counter on this?
I think you even heard last week, last Thursday, Mr. Carney came out with a bunch of programs specifically on crime prevention. I think that there is an appetite within the Canadian electorate for a tough on crime attitude. And I think, you know, it's about tone, it's about how you deal with it. It's having a bit more of a organized thought process about beginning to end, where these crimes start, how you punish them. Bail is part of the process. It's more of a holistic view that, you know, sometimes is missing from the criminal justice system. We maybe disagree with a court decision, a Supreme Court decision. We can even come out and say, I don't really agree with this decision, which has happened in these cases. You know, with the Bissonnette and the Quebec City, where there was criticism by David Lametti when he was Justice Minister. But you respect the courts. And when you start to question their legitimacy, that is also something that starts to echo a little bit of south of the border. So I think it's healthy to have these debates. I don't think we have a great criminal justice system. I think we need to do a lot better. And I think acknowledging that, which Mark Carney has done, is a good first step, but it's how far do you go? And is this become just, I'm going to do these talking points that are just going to rile people up? Yes, it'll be great for your base, but do average Canadians go, oh, that'll solve the problem about my car theft because the mass murderer is going to go to jail for life? I don't know if all people will make that connection.
Okay. All right. We're just going to put pause on this because we want to take a look at where things stand in this race. Election Day is just 2 weeks away, and Canadians can head out to the polls for advance voting starting on Friday. And the main party leaders will go head-to-head on the debate stage in just 2 days. So let's check in on the current state of the race. It's Monday. That means Eric Grenier is here. He is the author of the Writ.ca, and he also runs the CBC poll tracker. You can see him there arriving on set. Eric, good to see you. When we checked in with you last week, the Liberals were polling ahead of the Conservatives by about 6 points. Where are we with 2 weeks to go?
Pretty much the same place. We haven't really seen much movement. So if we take a look at where things stand right now in the poll tracker, which brings together all the polls that are being published throughout this campaign, the Liberals are still at 44% support. And nationally, the Conservatives are at 38%, so it's a 6-point gap between the two parties. The New Democrats are just under 9% support across the country, the Bloc Québécois at 5%, and the Greens at 2.4%. So that 6-point gap that we've seen between the Liberals and the Conservatives for the last few weeks, it does seem to be holding pretty firm.
Okay, so this all points to Liberal majority right now. So walk us through the seats. What does the seat projection look like?
Yeah, with these kinds of numbers that we see across the country, we do project that the Liberals would win a majority government. So if we take a look at where the seat projection stands right now, we do have the Liberals in majority territory. We're at 198 seats for the Liberals right now, with a range of between 179 to 215. So that is including, it's all majority territory. Conservatives are at 123 with between 107 and 136 seats, so more or less where they were in the last election. Bloc Québécois looks like they could drop half of their caucus down to 16. The New Democrats at 5 with a range of between 2 and 14, and 1 for the Greens between a range of 0 and 2 for the Green Party.
Okay, all right. We're bringing back the map here, Eric, because it's acting up a little bit today, but we're going to try to see if it'll work. I want to focus in on Quebec because this is a key fight right here in terms of what you talked about, the Liberals and the Bloc Québécois, primarily here in the greater Montreal area. You can see all the red here on the island of Montreal. That's Alexander Boulay-Reese, and that's La Salle-Mare. That's the one that the Bloc won in that by-election. But Eric, it's this North Shore and this South Shore. When you look at the numbers and how they're breaking down in Quebec, the Liberals, to really increase their chances at a majority, they got to turn some of this red. How does this play out?
It looks like that could happen. Even the island would get swept red, except for maybe Boulay-Reese's seat. But in Quebec right now, it is a big lead for the Liberals. They now have 43% support in the province. And in second place is not the Bloc right now. It is the Conservatives. The Conservative vote is up from the last election. They're at 24%. They're not going to win anything in and around Montreal, but they could pick up some seats around Quebec City area. The Bloc Québécois is right now at 22%, so they're down quite a bit. That's putting them down to that 2011, 2015 level of support they had. And the NDP quite further back with 6% support in Quebec at the moment.
Okay, all right. Now, I want to look at Ontario because this is kind of the ball game. I want to focus on two distinct areas. One, of course, look, the GTA, right? This is downtown Toronto. That is the Toronto-St. Paul seat that the Conservatives won in the by-election. I'm going to zoom out. Let's see if I can get the map to cooperate with me here. Zoom out a little bit because really, it's less about Toronto, right, Eric? It's more about this, right? The 905. The numbers that you're seeing, this is where the Liberals need to, this is where the Conservatives need to really gain if they're going to get to the 65, 70, 75 seats they're going to need in Ontario. What do the numbers tell us about that part?
They do not suggest that the Conservatives are in a position to make those kinds of gains right now. If we look at where things stand in Ontario at the moment, the Liberals have a big lead in the polls, and it's one of the reasons why they're so far ahead in the seat projection. 49% support for the Liberals right now in Ontario. And the Conservatives are 11 points back at 38%. The NDP is at 9% support in the province. So this is a bigger gap than we saw between the Liberals and the Conservatives in the last election. So if the Conservatives were going to be able to close the gap at all, win some of those seats in the GTA, particularly those in the Western GTA, so Peel region and Halton, they would need to be a lot closer in the Ontario-wide numbers, and we just aren't seeing that. We have seen some polls recently that have a bit of a tighter margin nationally, but we have not seen that happen in Ontario just yet.
Right, this is the key thing. The regional numbers kind of tell the story. I want to focus on one more region of Ontario, and I want to show there is a lot of blue in this part. Southwestern Ontario, right, with the focus on Donald Trump, this is the most trade-exposed pound per pound part of the country. Auto sector, you know, basically from Hamilton down to Windsor. The New Democrat vote, Eric, we don't know where it's going to go. Probably favors the Liberals if it does go anywhere. What do you make of this particular region of Ontario based on the digits that we're seeing in the polling?
Yeah, based on the numbers we see in Ontario, with the Liberal number so high and the NDP number so low, I mean, some of that is going to come from places where the NDP already holds the seat. Right now in the seat projection, the 3 seats that we have that the NDP is competitive in is Windsor West, London Fanshawe, and Hamilton Centre. Those were the 3 orange seats that you saw on that map. Is their NDP vote going to be concentrated in those ridings, or is it actually going to continue going over to the Liberals like we've seen in the polls? If so, the Liberals could pick up some of those seats. they would have been maybe Conservative seats in the past, especially in London and Windsor, but with this huge increase in support for the Liberals in Ontario, it seems more likely that a lot of those NDP voters might be going over to the Liberals.
Okay, I wiped out all the color because this is where we are right now, 2 weeks to go. So just one last question for you, Eric. I mean, the main party leaders, French debate on Wednesday, English debate on Thursday. What are you watching for there in terms of the ability of these moments to change the course of the election?
I think it's actually going to be what's going to happen with, certainly the Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney battle is going to be the one that everybody's going to be looking at, but what's going to happen with Jagmeet Singh and Yves-François Blanchet? Because Singh used the 2019 English language debate to save the NDP's campaign in that election, and Blanchet has used both of the 2019 and 2021 debates. In 2021, it was the English language debate, oddly enough, but it saved their campaigns. And for Pierre Poilievre, he would love to grab some points away from Mark Carney, but he would love even more to see that NDP number go up, and that bloc number go up, because with the Liberals at 40+ support in the polls, they win a majority government.
Yeah, and there's only so much of that Poilievre can take away. He needs the others to squeeze him. All right, Eric, thank you so much to Eric Grenier, author of therit.ca and the keeper of the CBC poll tracker. Rob, let's start with you there. I mean, what do you make of where this race is at this stage? When you look at sort of there's a static gap in the top line polls, but all the regional splits right now, they kind of favor the Liberals in a pretty meaningful way.
I thought that we began to see another evolution in the Conservative campaign, which I think is very interesting. If you watched Tout le monde en parle, if you watch the media that Mr. Poilievre did on YouTube, he did a couple of YouTube podcasts, he showed lifelike tendencies. He got off the message track. He was there with his wife. He talked about his kids. He talked about his special needs daughter. It was a side of Pierre Poilievre that is rarely seen. And I thought it was effective campaigning. If you look at what Mr. Carney and the Liberals have done, I thought they were needlessly sleepy the last couple of days. Now, everybody understands what's going on. Right now, they're in debate prep, massive debate
And he's got to work on his French and be ready to go.
And it looks like that work has paid off. If you watch Tout le monde en parle, I thought that his French was, I wouldn't call it fluid, but he wasn't searching and trying to seize and grasp for words, right? It was a little bit more fluid. He understood the questions. He got a cultural reference to Roque Belles Oreilles. He got that right. But what they're doing is debate prep. I understand that. But it looks like the Liberals are playing out the clock a little bit the last few days, whereas Mr. Poilievre is doing policy and he's doing these podcasts and, again, showing this different side, which I think is noteworthy. I was in British Columbia last week. Fascinating. Again, I went there because of Eric. He suggested I go to a riding in Abbotsford, one of the most conservative ridings in the country. And what I saw there was fascinating. The Liberals, if they had an energetic campaign going, could actually take one of the most conservative ridings in the country because there's a split on the right. There are very angry Conservatives there, angry for two reasons. Angry because of Western alienation. They feel like they're getting sort of pokered out again by the population in Ontario and Quebec, and there's talk of secession there. But there is some anger towards the Conservative campaign, that it is too extreme for some of the people there. And they split the vote there. I spoke to Mike de Jong, who's still mystified as to why he...
Yeah, he was not allowed to run for the nomination after being
being
a Liberal, the Conservative-bent Liberal finance minister provincially for multiple years.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so I found it to be in very... Like the NDP vote, what vote is there is collapse. Very much a microcosm of the country. And a fascinating trip.
Right, but you know, Ontario is the ball game for the Conservatives, right? Because they're going to run up.
And what happened in Ontario today?
Well, this is you're setting up the clip I want to play, because the Premier of Ontario, you've heard of him. His name is Doug Ford, probably the most successful Conservative politician in Canada, if you look at the resume. He was asked today about the criticism coming from his campaign manager, Corey Tenike, who does a podcast with Jordan on the regular, towards the federal Conservative campaign and calling it campaign malpractice. Now, Doug Ford could have avoided this. Instead, he said this.
He's tough as nails, but he's the best campaign manager in the country. And to be very frank, if Corey was running that campaign, I don't think Mr. Poilievre would be in the position he's in right now. But it's still a lot of time left. We still have debates. At the end of the day, the people will decide which way they want this country to move forward. But sometimes the truth hurts.
Okay, Lisa, how does that go over with Conservatives in Ontario? Because there's some Conservative on Conservative crime happening in this province.
Why did I know you were going to go to me first on this one, David?
You just feel like the resident expert. What do you think?
Yeah, so it's never fun to see people fighting in the family. I don't know if we're fighting, but I would just offer this. Okay. So when the Premier said that if Corey and I were running the campaign, we'd be doing a lot better. And I want to know, is he talking about the NDP campaign? Because if I look at the Ontario numbers, you know, between the NDP and the Greens, they had 24 points in Ontario. And if you look at the numbers that Eric Grenier just put up, the Greens and the NDP have 11 points across the country, in Ontario as well. So as a result, we're playing with 13 points in terms of the benefit of having a stronger NDP and a stronger Green Party to the Conservatives. So to say that it's only about the campaign, I think is a misdirection. I don't think it's only about the campaign. I think it has as much to do with how the NDP is doing and how the Greens are doing. You still need to have that split on the progressive side in order for a Conservative to win. We're doing as well as we've ever done. Our base is there. They're going to show up. It's going to come down to who shows up on that day. And I put my money on the Conservative campaign on getting out that vote.
Jordan, your thoughts as someone who spends a lot of mornings, early mornings, talking to Corey Teneycke on the Curse of Politics podcast.
Yeah, well, he is tough as nails. That is true. Yeah. I mean, look, Lisa's not wrong, but of course the numbers that the NDP is facing and the position that they came into this granted exceptional race in is also not accidental. That was in part down to a choice by the Conservative campaign to take out negative advertising on Jagmeet Singh for several months. They absolutely did, leading up into the campaign. It's also a choice, by the way, for the Conservative campaign to continue to adopt Trump-like hard, divisive, polarizing language that is frankly scaring progressive voters. So I think that the point that Ford and Corey and frankly many others in the Conservative movement are making is that these are choices. This is not circumstantial. The campaign is making a tactical decision for their own reasons to campaign in this way, and they're doing it in a way that is, yes, it is frightening to progressives. It is sending NDP voters towards the Liberals, and they could choose to do differently.
Jono, just before I get to you, Rob, just to give you an update, in Abbotsford, South Langley, which is the riding you're in, Ed Fast is endorsing Mike DeYoung. Right, former Conservative cabinet minister, that's his riding, I think. He is endorsing the independent rather than the Conservative.
And much beloved if you talk to Conservatives still in that riding. So that endorsement will carry weight.
Yep, and former Abbotsford Mayor Henry Braun will also endorse the independent candidate, which is Jono, what do you make of this? I mean, the numbers, there's a lot of noise in the daily trackers, but broadly, we're looking at a 6-point give or take national lead for your crowd.
It has moved a lot in the last few days. You've seen a couple polls that said it was shrinking, others that were saying no, it's just as consistent as it has been.
It's the polar coaster, you know?
I mean, one could say nothing has really happened in the last few weeks. Maybe since Trump's tariff announcements and then retractions, but not that much has happened. There was the Radio Canada Sang Chef night. Not much happened. It wasn't very eventful. Tout le monde en parle, big night, huge audience. I've spoken to a bunch of people, Conservatives and Liberals. I don't think anybody had any memorable moments. In 5 years from now, when we look back, I don't think we're going to say it's Jack Layton 2011 moment where it turned things around. So we're kind of in this static moment, and we've all been waiting. We've been talking about this for a few weeks. What's going to happen between now and the debates? Well, they're here, and I guess everybody is watching. It's a matter of, is it somebody's to lose or somebody's to gain? I think the French debate, Yves-François Blanchet has a problem. He's got a real challenge, okay? And he's an excellent debater. He's come out of debates in both elections, gaining momentum and gaining seats. But he's got two different people he's going after. Because in Quebec, more seats that he's head-to-head historically are Conservative. Bloc Conservative seats. Right. Now, with the Liberal numbers being so high, you're starting to see, you saw that area around Montreal that you pointed out, starting to be Bloc Liberal seats. So he's got to protect some seats on one flank and protect other seats on another flank. And so he's got to go after both. And can he do that effectively? It's not easy. So he's going to have to pick and choose on different issues, which ones he can score points on Sorry, go ahead.
No, as I understand it, he has the same calibration that Poilievre is going to have in the English debate of how hard do you go at Mark Carney? Because we're going to have Louis Blouin and Joël Denis-Bellavance on the show a little bit later to talk about this, but there is this reservoir of sympathy for Carney in Quebec that the journalists find when they do something about how bad his French is, he gets hammered. They get hammered for it, like the journalists do. And this is one of the things I know the Bloc is calibrating, that if they're too aggressive, it's seen as too negative and it could actually hurt.
Well, they have been until now, and it's not working. In fact, it's backfired. And I would say amongst my friends in Quebec, I'm the harshest because I'm the Anglo, and I want to make sure people, Anglophones speak French well. And the Francophones are saying, no, we understand what he's saying. The message is getting across. And at the end of the day, Quebec voters are like voters across Canada. They're concerned about tariffs and Trump and the economy, and they think Mark Carney is the best guy. That's the message. And it's consistent. It hasn't changed. And I don't know that anything has happened that would suddenly make it change.
Yeah, as Paul Wells said last week, his French is good enough to deal with Donald Trump is sort of the conclusion a lot of people have come to. Okay, we're going to put a button on that because we're going to get to the Liberal campaign. Because the Liberal campaign is hunkering down in the Montreal area as it prepares for those debates. Leader Mark Carney, he was in Dorval this morning pitching a made-in-Canada defense procurement strategy.
We won't only bring the Canadian Armed Forces up to today's standards, we will also build a military that is ready to fight threats that Canada is facing, and we will protect Canadians now and into the future.
Carney says his plan would prioritize buying from Canadian companies for military purchases and help Canadian businesses that want to pursue international markets, especially in Europe. But that announcement wasn't the only news from the Liberal leader this morning. Carney also apologized for the actions of some unidentified Liberal staffers. The CBC's Kate McKenna has more on that. Kate.
David, Liberal leader Mark Carney says he apologizes unreservedly after we first reported that Liberal staffers were behind an operation intended to plant buttons at an event for Conservatives. Now, 2 Liberal operatives went to the Canada Strong and Free Network conference last week. This is an event where Conservatives from across the country are able to meet and network, and they planted buttons that had a pro-Trump message, one that said "Stop the Steal," an apparent reference to the 2020 push to overturn the U.S. election results, and an apparent effort to tie Canadian Conservatives to the MAGA movement in the United States. Now, we found out about this because I overheard the people responsible talking about it at a bar last Friday and reported it soon after. Mark Carney says that this behavior is unacceptable, and he apologized.
Look, this is totally unacceptable, to be absolutely clear. And I, on behalf of my campaign, I was unaware of this behavior, but on behalf of my campaign, I apologize for it unreservedly. Okay. I've made it absolutely clear to my campaign that this behavior or anything approximating it or in that spirit is unacceptable, cannot happen again.
The Conservatives say these are dirty tricks from the Liberals and that they are the ones responsible for importing American-style politics to Canada. Mark Carney says the people responsible have been reassigned to other tasks on the campaign. David?
All right, Kate, thank you so much. That's the CBC's Kate McKenna in Montreal. Jono, reassigned within the campaign? They're no longer on the fake button committee? I mean, what do you make of this? I know he had to apologize for it, but this was sloppy and kind of silly.
They're doing door-to-door in Northwest Territories? I don't know. Look, I think Mark Carney dealt with this very clearly, and he said unreservedly but unequivocally, which was the only answer. And I think, despite what any negative comments you hear out there criticizing Mark Carney, everything that Conservatives or NDPers will say what's wrong with him, I don't think anybody imagines that this is Mark Carney's style. This is not something that he would put up with.
That should also be the word. I say silly because it's silly to talk about it in a bar. Like, you know what I mean?
Well,
like the buttons, like the Jenny Byrne, Corey Tonight button, that's trolling. Stop the steal, though. That's even Liberals cannot defend that one. Right? Yeah. I mean, whatever it is, it ain't good. So sorry, John. I don't mean to interrupt you because there's been a bunch of other buttons that the Conservatives have put out on social media. The Liberals in their statement said, some of the stuff isn't ours. I've emailed them multiple times saying, well, which ones are yours? Who exactly cleared this? Because war rooms don't do this without clearance from someone senior in the campaign. And is reassigned enough for something like this? What do you think?
I don't know what reassign means. Yeah. I think it may be a nice way of saying you can go home now. I don't know. I don't know who did it. Yes, it was stupid. It was silly. You can go through the list. There's no reason to even try to nuance it. And yeah, every campaign's going to have people doing dirty tricks, rat effing, and all other things that have historically happened in campaigns. Yes, that exists. But this is, I agree with the distinction between the two buttons. The disinformation is wrong and also completely unnecessary. You're doing well in your campaign. Why even go to this? But at the end of the day, you know, there are thousands of volunteers across the country doing things. Some of them are going to do stupid things. What you need is a clear denunciation by the leader saying no. And should have said, made that message, had a meeting with every single volunteer and staffer before the campaign. We're not going to put up with dirty tricks. Okay, fine. But stuff's going to happen during the campaign. It's how you deal with it. And we talked about it with candidates that had to be removed. It's how you deal with it. Well, he dealt with it very clearly and unequivocally, and that's the only choice. And I think that that's how you move on from it.
Yeah, look, the statement we got from the party yesterday was crap in terms of, there are stronger words I would like to use. It spoke around the issue without speaking to the issue. It was all this nonsense, passive voice, and it reminded me of the comms troubles they had when they were at 16% in the polls. So, Lisa, I don't know if they've learned from that near-death experience in terms of addressing an issue clearly. The Liberal leader was better at it today, but you know, I take Jonathan's point. There's thousands of volunteers across the country, and there's always some meathead who's going to rip down a sign or something like that in a riding. But this is right out of the war room, this sort of thing, and it kind of undermines what Mark Carney's central pitch is to Canadians in this campaign.
For sure. And it was very nefarious. I don't think it was innocent at all. I mean, I looked up to see what the other buttons were that were out there. I mean, we've done button competitions in the past, but it's usually mocking people. It's not about actively seeking to draw attention to an issue to make it sound more Trumpy than what they are. So, for example, Lock Justin Up was one of them. Wexit Now. Make Canada Great Again. I mean, what is this crap? They should absolutely be off the campaign. They're lucky they're not getting charged. They should be talked about whether or not they're spreading disinformation by this committee in the House of Commons or by this committee of bureaucrats. I mean, this is absolutely outrageous. And for us to tut it away as, oh, well, you know, kids are being kids. The other part, David, that really bugs me, I'm on a roll now. The other part that really bugs me about this whole thing is the hubris and the arrogance of bragging about it and not giving a damn. Like, do they think they're that far ahead in the polls that it's not that terrible to talk about out loud that they're going to get away with it? So, you know what? Toss the lot of them. Mark's got a big problem if he's letting that rot inside his campaign. And if they're only reassigning them, then it's higher up than we expect.
Well, you know, Jordan, I talked to some of the people who may have done this on campaigns past who were offended by the sloppiness and silliness of it all, that if you're going to do this, 2 to 3 people should know max and nobody should be talking about it outside. But even they... like again, like we've seen this, for example, at well, I think at one of Trudeau's last biennial conventions for the Liberals, there was Anita Anand for leader badges and Chrystia Freeland for leader badges. That's like the trolling, mischief-making silliness, but the stop the steal stuff in particular is a problem here.
There's totally a difference between the pranky elements that you would find in a normal kind of war room operation and what happened here. So, I mean, there's a number of problems with this situation and how it was handled. That's the first one. And the reason for it, I think, is not just because it's wrong to spread disinformation, which it is, but also because now it's given the Conservatives cover for any sort of wackiness that's going to come out of their rallies and their campaigns, not just for the duration of this campaign, but for like the next decade. This is going to be referred back to, and there'll be questions about whether something was a false flag operation or not. And that's not helpful. It's not, and it's also not necessary. And that's the other thing about this that I think is so remarkable. You know, and I've talked about this elsewhere, but war rooms are a font of ideas, and they're not all going to be good ideas. And it's up to the leadership to leave a lot of that stuff on the cutting room floor and to really make a decision. Is this additive? Is this going to be helpful to our campaign? And I would make the case here that this clearly was not, and even if they hadn't been caught, it was not, because already the narrative of the Poilievre campaign being too close to Trump is out there. They are in the midst of having their own family fight. You don't need to get involved in that. The Carney campaign Their main offer is calm and stability and a lack of drama, and this violated that. And then lastly, I want to agree, I think it's, reassigning these staffers to somewhere else in the campaign is really not acceptable. They displayed excessively poor judgment, not just in doing this, but of course in speaking about it in front of a journalist. And yes, I understand these are likely young people who are learning something, but there's a big boys will be boys energy to the way it's been dealt with that I think is no good.
Yeah, to Lisa's point, she named off all the other badges. Some of those, like Make Canada Great Again, that's a hat, that's a T-shirt. That's what you do see that at Conservative rallies. I don't know if the Liberals planted that or not, because Rob, I emailed them, because they issued the statement. I said, this doesn't answer questions. So I was like, exactly which buttons were created and distributed by the Liberal Party? What message were you intending to send? Who in the campaign sanctioned these? Was the leader aware, the executive director, the co-directors? What was the highest level of approval? I've yet to get a response. I don't think I'm going to get a response.
Right.
But it seems unlikely that a couple of people ordered buttons, which have like a 3-day turnaround,
right,
and decided to go into enemy territory to do the Operation Button Drop without some level of clearance. Right.
Yeah. This sounds like like all of us have done this, where we've sat around and played with slogans and come up with comical variations of them. And I'll give you one. Our good friend Keith Bogue, who worked at a small station, one of his first jobs, did a twist on the station slogan. When news breaks, so does our equipment. We all do this sort of thing, but we don't go to air with that stuff. And if you're a political operative, I'm sure they're sitting around punching button slogans, but they don't put them out there. In this instance, they did. And what is the effect? Jordan said it. You go to any Mark Carney rally, and one of the first parts of his stump speech is, I know I'm not a politician. In other words, I'm not like the other guys. And this makes that kind of a laugh line now.
He's change is what he's trying to tell people who want change, right? He'll be
that's
different.
Right. I'm not like the other guys. The other thing, part of his stump speech is, the other guys are like Trump. I'm going to stand up to Mr. Trump. Mr. Poilievre is going to kneel down to him. Well, it's going to be harder to make that claim as well when you're using Trumpy kind of tactics. One last thing I will say on behalf of, I mentioned Keith Bogan, journalist. There are parties that don't want to talk to the CBC sometimes. This, I think, is a vivid example as to why you should speak to a reporter from the CBC like Kate McKenna, who is rigorous and relentless and will go after you no matter which party you are from. Okay, beware the CBC, because they'll turn on you. It doesn't matter what your stripe is.
Well, John,
I would be proud of any reporter that did that.
Yeah, and look, I could show you all the emails and messages I received today, John, saying, you won't cover this tonight, you don't have the courage. I'm like, come on, guys, like, how are we not going to talk about this? But, just going back to what Rob was talking about, that Carney comes out and he makes I am different. This is the sort of thing, I don't know if it's going to be a story beyond today. I have no idea. It depends what else happens. But it is, again, another one of those things that he did not need. Like the Paul Chang day was one of those days where he lost a day in the campaign. I don't know if he quite lost today, but he got a nuisance here.
Some of these feel like you're scoring in your own net, but maybe it's really proof that he's not a politician. And so there is a delay, and you would wish that there would be, the issues team would immediately have all these great lines prepared. I don't know how you have lines prepared for this kind of situation, but, that would have been better. But at the end of the day, I don't know if this rises to the level of Gate. I am not saying it's okay. I'm not, but I don't know if this
gets overused. Watergate's a whole different thing.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a Gate level, and I don't know, and I'm trying to like read, smaller papers, local papers in Quebec, how much coverage does it get? Is this an Ottawa bubble thing or not? I don't know how much traction it has, and I guess we'll see, but the decision this morning to be very clear, unequivocal, was an attempt to say, okay, we screwed up, let's move on. Will Pierre Poilievre want to harp on this? That's also a good question to look forward to the next day or two.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the leader there might do. Lisa, last thoughts on that? On this issue?
Yeah, well, if Mr. Carney's not running his own politics, somebody is running it for him on his behalf, and we should know who that is, who's making these kinds of decisions. If he's making the decisions to hold off to see if he can skate through these kinds of things, then he's making the wrong decisions.
Okay, we're going to check in on what's happening in the United States because Donald Trump's trade war, if you can believe it, it could be shifting gears yet again. Today, the U.S. president says he was reconsidering his tariffs on foreign-made auto parts. The CBC's Katie Simpson joins us now from Washington to walk us through this. So, Katie, here's the loaded question. What did Trump say in the Oval Office today?
Yeah, here's the thing. We think it might be about auto parts. It might be about autos. It's where I'm seeking clarity from the White House, as is every other reporter who covers this. And pretty much everyone is covering this a lot right now because it is sort of what is dictating markets, dictating jobs. It has such a massive impact on everything, everyday prices for people. So it's obviously the thing. So Donald Trump was in the Oval Office today with the president of El Salvador. When he was asked, he opened up the floor to questions. He was asked a series of questions about tariffs. He was initially asked about product exemptions. The big story right now in the United States had been, the exemptions around electronics. On Friday, the White House announced some broad exemptions for electronics, but then later walked it back, saying, listen, these are going to be hit with different tariffs at a later date. So he was asked a question about products and exemptions, and he offered up this about the auto sector. Have a listen.
Looking at something to help some of the car companies where they're switching to parts that were made in Canada, Mexico, and other places, and they need a little bit of time because they're going to make them here, but they need a little bit of time. So I'm talking about things like that.
So right now, the White House has imposed 25% tariffs on foreign autos, foreign-built autos. There are some carve-outs for CUSMA-compliant components in there. It gets very complicated and very technical. It is not easy for the Canadian auto sector to navigate by any means. There are new additional tariffs that are supposed to take place next month, a 25% tariff on foreign-made auto parts. It is incredibly complicated and complex, given how deeply intertwined the North American auto sector is, as well as bringing in parts and components from other parts of the world. So exactly what the president means in this moment, whether he's talking about the already in place 25% auto tariffs that do have some exceptions, or is he talking about the upcoming 25% tariffs or upcoming tariffs on auto parts? The White House has not responded to my emails at this point. I will send more emails as well. But again, that suggests things could be changing for a very volatile sector in this moment. Donald Trump's ultimate goal here, to remember, is even though tariffs are making things so incredibly difficult in this moment, Donald Trump's ultimate goal is to bring jobs to the United States, taking them even at the expense of other countries, including Canada. That is his ultimate goal here.
Yeah, it sounds like on his face he's saying, I might give them a break so they can make the money they need to build whatever they need to build in the U.S. to get out of Canada, which is not a good outcome for this country. But, Katie, he's also floating that idea, his tariff policy on other sectors also shifting.
Yeah, so I mentioned the electronics, the debacle that took place over the weekend. The White House saying there were no exemptions, even though the actual notice they put out, the formal notice, talked about confirmations and exclusions and exemptions. So, it was their language, and they the president blaming the media for calculating the situation. The president has said that specific details about electronics and the tariffs they will face will be coming sometime this week. They will be in a different tariff bucket, as the White House likes to say. So they're doing national security investigations into the whole electronic system for things like semiconductor chips, and that will sort of be a part of that bucket. And then the president is still continuing his ongoing investigation into the pharmaceutical industry, looking to impose tariffs on that specific sector as well. Details are expected to be announced very soon. So those are sort of the things that are shifting. Now, with Donald Trump's comments around the auto sector today and sort of what happened over the weekend, markets closed a little bit higher today, just slightly higher, but some American domestic automakers, their stocks were up around 4% or so today, amid word that there could be a pause to some of the tariffs, whichever ones Donald Trump was speaking about, and hopefully we will get some clarification from the White House soon.
Katie, when this is all over, I want to do a supercut of you saying I'm seeking clarity from the White House. Because
I will say the White House generally does email back.
I know.
They just haven't yet. So
it's just the amount of times you have to do it. That's what I'm referring to. All right, Katie, always appreciate it. This is CBC's Katie Simpson in Washington, D.C. All right, I'm going to seek some clarity here from the power panel on all of this. Jordan, I don't know precisely what that means. I mean, there are the auto tariffs in place. There's a review going on parts of whether or not to bring them in on the 3rd. But, the thought of more and more and more buckets of tariffs.
This means that this continues to insert itself into the campaign. And this means that Canadians who are concerned about the really devastating impact of these tariffs will have cause to continue to be reminded about their economic threat. And, I think in the auto sector in particular, we saw another wave of layoffs happening last week that, this is devastating in communities. So I think we're going to continue to see that discussion, and particularly leading into the debate week, likely favorable for Mark Carney, I think, in terms of setting the table for an issue that he's managed to really grab the ballot question on.
Jono, it's fascinating that even if the president doesn't say something specific and clear, which is most things, there is still a run on a stock or a bond market somewhere that hits someone's savings and retirement plans, right in the tariff buckets. And this is the thing that whether it's deliberate or not, the idea that he's going to calm down and go away, it seems impossible with the 2 weeks left in this campaign.
Well, within the 2 weeks or the next 4 years. Yeah. I don't think anybody has much optimism about that. We see that in polls. We see that when we talk to our friends, colleagues. It's top of mind for everybody. And I think that, again, is driving, I agree with Jordan, it is driving the election. It has until now, and it seems like it will continue to do so. You talked about semiconductor chips. I mean, in the eastern townships of Quebec, the big plant that's finishing chips and sending them to the States. So every day there's a new sector or a new business in Canada that, are they going to have their jobs Monday morning, when they wake up? So stocks, savings, RRSPs, people who are, reaching retirement age, Yves-François Blanchet has tried to make, and going back to the fall in promising that he would give the Liberals cover in a vote if they would increase funding for seniors between 65 and 75. Yeah. That was his big issue. But here, it's everybody, and especially people who are getting close to retirement. How does Blanchet, he's talked about this again, this issue, how it's unfair. Well, how does he get any traction on it when this is part of a bigger issue? It's about tariffs. It's about Trump. It's about trade. And it's very hard for these two parties, talked with the NDP and the Bloc, to really say why you need to vote for them.
Rob, one of the last trips I took as a reporter before I got this job was to the North American Leader Summit in Mexico City, when President Biden, Prime Minister Trudeau, and AMLO, the Mexican president, were talking about this very specific chips processing plant as part of a North American semiconductor strategy. And here we are a couple of years later with all of that potentially being detonated because of the protectionist instincts of Donald Trump.
Yeah, and what is the end result of all of that? The end result is that which company, who's going to invest in Canada, for instance? Who's going to put money in Canada given the uncertainty that our industries face right now? And I say we act surprised when this happens every day, but the chaos is a feature, not a bug.
Oh, yeah.
It's part of the plan. Yeah. But, I mean, let's look at what he said. In essence, he said, you've got some time before I'm going to force you to manufacture in the United States. Well, how much time? You've got product lines you got to decide. If you're in Canada, you've got some product lines that might be coming to an end. Are you going to retool your plant, or are you going to have to prepare for your plant to shut down? If your plant is shutting down and you want to invest someplace else, you got to find the land for that plant. Not a lot of land in the United States close to
not a big labor pool in the U.S. right now.
Not 4% unemployment. You've got
tight immigration.
That's right. So what else do you got to do? You got the land. Well, let's say you get it. Then you got to build. Then you got to decide your product line, and then you got to decide. You got to train your workforce, and that's after you've decided which model. That's 5 years, right? That's 5 years minimum before this happens. Perhaps Mr. Trump will be in his third term. We don't know that, but that's what it's going to be into his third term. And in the meantime, countries like Canada and Mexico are going to pay a price because a lot of money is going to stay on the sidelines until that's all decided.
I mean, Trump aside, if J.D. Vance is the president of the United States, I mean, you know, if Trumpism survives the Trump presidency, that all of this remains a threat. And, you know, Lisa, you know, we talked about semiconductor chips. Going back to talking to Eric about the map, southwestern Ontario, all of those factories down there, all of that manufacturing jobs, that whole auto sector, and just the disruptive effect, all of this. Anxiety is not a strong enough word. The fear that has on voters down there as they make a decision about who's best to protect their livelihoods.
Yeah. So I would say the informed consensus in corporate Canada right now is that you can only control what you can control. You can't control what Donald Trump is going to say on a given day. So you have to move past that and not get caught back and forth on figuring out what to do in response. But what you can control is your response to Donald Trump. And, you know, I had a conversation with a former ambassador to Canada, and he noted to me, you know, having language around the fact that the relationship between Canada and the United States is broken, it's done, it's never going to be the same again, is not helpful, quite frankly. The companies that are going to be making the decisions about whether or not to go back to the United States and put their manufacturing there are Americans. They're American companies. And if they're hearing that the relationship is broken, they're being pushed in a way in which a decision may not be positive for us. And to the points that I thought good points Rob just made in terms of the hurdles of bringing those kinds of manufacturing back to the United States, I would just say this. This becomes an opportunity for companies just to get out of the labor business in general and implement robotics and AI that is going to be coming across for new places that are being built in states that don't necessarily have labor regulations. So companies could see this as a great opportunity for them as well to get out of Canada, where the costs are a little bit higher because we tend to treat our people a hell of a lot better. And we have rules around with respect to robotics and AI and implementation of technology. So if we puff out our chest here in Canada and say things like it's over and we want to run on being tough and elbows up, it all feels really good in the moment. But know that other people are thinking about what the life does look like without having these plants in Canada right now, and they're figuring out workarounds. So our tone is going to be very important, and it should not be matching Donald Trump's. It should be figuring out how we deal with the companies here and giving them assurances that we know what we're doing.
Jordan, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that our tone here has been matching Donald Trump, and I think that there would be a real concern about not really striking back and working from a position of strength. I think that the hope for Canada is that now that tariffs are impacting our allies more widely, is that we won't be fighting this fight alone anymore, that we can look to, for example, Europe and other allied countries who are being impacted by tariffs and have some common approach on retaliation and putting pressure on the United States to end this. And that is, I think, remains our best bet. And that does mean looking a little bit beyond our own borders and looking to some new partnerships that have maybe been underutilized until now.
So Jono, like I take Lisa's point that you run the risk with your rhetoric of, you know, furthering the divide, but I guess in a negotiation you also have to talk tough. You know, I mean, I've never had to deal with a continental breakup before, so I don't know what the right tone is to strike. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, is there really a playbook on how to deal with Donald Trump and what he's going to think? You said between now and tomorrow, but I don't know in the next hour. You're right that there are maybe certain lines you shouldn't cross, but we've also seen that he seems to respect people who push back. So where's you know, maybe not Zelensky in the White House, but it depends who and where. It's inconsistent, in fact. And so trying to predict where that exact line is of acting, it's not about acting strong or tough. It's about standing up for yourself, making clear where the lines are. I think Mark Carney was effective in saying, I'm not going to respond to somebody who's calling me governor and calling Canada the 51st state. I don't think the personal insult was the issue, but it's about the respect for Canada and its institutions. So I'm not gonna get down in the mud with him. And I think, you know, does that turn Donald Trump off? Well, you know, it seemed to be mildly effective at the moment, and you take the small victories where you can get them. And then the question is, what do you do next? I think we really see that whoever wins this election, afterwards there's going to be a much sooner than later reopening of Kuzma. It was, you know, supposed to be in 2026. I don't think anybody believes that it's going to go that far. I think it's going to be in the really short term.
It's going to start in May, whoever wins.
We're going to talk in May, but remember that soon thereafter we have the G7. So there's this big moment where Donald Trump's coming to Canada, unless Jagmeet Singh wins and he bans him. But otherwise, you're going to have Donald Trump here. It's going to culminate in this moment. I don't know that we're going to have CUSMA solved by then, but we're going to have to be well on our way, I think. Otherwise, it's going to be so confrontational. But again, I don't even know.
Okay, Rob, I got 30 seconds left, and I got to go.
I'll take less than that. The soundtrack for this election is the two-tone motif from Jaws. We all know it. That's right.
Yeah, just because there are young
whether
people
the shark
out there.
is there or not,
yeah,
that is the soundtrack. It induces dread. It induces anxiety. Sometimes the shark's there, sometimes he's not, but the shark is ever present. Today, the shark popped up again.
Okay, we can always see that fin hovering just out there beyond the swim rope. All right, we got to leave it there. Lisa Ray, Jonathan Kalis, Jordan Likeness, and Rob Russo, thank you so much. There's still lots more to come right here on Power and Politics. Quebec is one of those big battlegrounds that could decide this election. Up next, we're going to take a deep dive into the region and get some reviews of the two Lamana Pearl appearances. Also, an influential vote, women voters. The hosts of Beyond a Ballot podcast tell us the key issues for women in this race. And the Power Rankings panel is here to talk about the big moments from the campaign trail today. Want to catch up with Power and Politics while you're on the go? Then check out and follow our daily podcast. I'm David Cochrane. The Power and Politics podcast starts now, where I speak to the key players in the political stories that everyone is talking about. You can find the latest episode on the CBC Listen app or wherever you get your podcasts. Quebec is in the spotlight this week on the campaign trail as the leading parties get ready for the leaders' debates in Montreal. Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet began his day in Quebec City. He made an announcement about fighting crime and once again made his case for electing a minority government. He then headed to his own riding and will end the night just outside of Montreal.
I don't want to imagine what damages could be done to Quebec economy, to Quebec language, to Quebec values, to Quebec immigration, to Quebec environment, if we were to give a majority government to any of those two guys.
While Blanchet says he will live with whoever wins, whether that be the Liberals or the Conservatives, he said he hopes neither will be given a carte blanche. The CBC's Evan Dyer is on the road with the Bloc Québécois. Evan.
David, we saw a tough on crime proposal today from the Bloc Québécois' Yves-François Blanchet, suggesting that he'd introduce a bill to prevent the use of what's called the Jordan Rule to stop criminal prosecutions of violent crimes. The Jordan Rule was introduced by the Supreme Court in 2016 and basically says that if justice is delayed for too long, it's justice denied. And in practice, that often means that if a case takes more than 2.5 years to come to trial, it can be dismissed. Blanchet is saying no, there shouldn't be any time limits on the prosecution of the most violent crimes. This is a topic the Bloc has raised before, tabling a bill about this last year and even vowing to use the notwithstanding clause to push that through. This is a critical week, of course, for the Bloc Québécois. We're seeing all the parties converge on Quebec for the debates here in Montreal. Wednesday, the most important for the Bloc Québécois. We're told that they will be doing debate prep, although there won't be actors playing the roles of opposition parties. They're going to focus more on preparing for themes and potential questions, but there will be a lot of focus on that Wednesday debate because really that is perhaps the last and best chance for Yves-François Blanchet to stop the movement of Quebec voters towards Mark Carney's Liberals. David.
All right, Evan, thank you very much. That's the CBC's Evan Dyer in Montreal. And we're now just 2 days away from this election's only French language debate. And last night, the Liberal and Conservative leaders already underwent a crucial test in Quebec. Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney both appeared on the hyper-popular Radio-Canada talk show Tout le monde en parle. The show attracts up to 1 million viewers in a province with 78 seats, the second most in Canada. And there was a lot to lose for Carney and a lot to gain for his rivals because since January 6, the CBC's poll tracker shows the Bloc Québécois dropping from 36.6% support to just 22.3%. And on a directly opposite trajectory, the Liberals have gone from 20.9% to 43%. The Conservatives continue to hover around a quarter of that support. Okay, joining me to discuss what last night's appearances and Wednesday's debate can mean for Quebec, I have two bureau chiefs. Joël Denis-Bellevance is the parliamentary bureau chief for La Presse, and Louis Blouin, he's back from Montreal for one day only, the parliamentary bureau chief for Radio-Canada. Gang, good to see you. Louis, let's start with Tout le monde en parle, the appearance there. This is a must-do every election. Big test for Mark Carney and for Pierre Poilievre. What's your assessment of how it went for them?
Well, how serious it is, you know, his advisors, some of them told us that he prepped for days for that apparition.
Mark Carney did.
Yeah, because he knows that it's he's playing big, and he looked nervous at the debut, at the beginning of the interview, that's for sure. And he was, more technical in his answers. And, at the end, I think he became more natural. But he lost himself in a few answers, on Bill 21, his opposition to Bill 96 too, because of the clause, the notwithstanding clause.
I would guess discussing secularism laws, language laws, and the notwithstanding clause in your second language is tough.
Quite a mix.
Yeah.
See? Yeah. Even me. So anyway, so that was that part was, and his advisors were telling him trying to keep the answers short, and it was not always possible. But he did score some points on cultural references with Quebec. He was asked about the humorists group, the stand-up comedian group that the host was part of, Roch et Belles Oreilles, and he nailed that answer to finish the interview. And I think we could hear his advisors in the back saying, "Oh my God, he did it!" There was some kind of
and that's important to the Quebec audience because there's nothing like this in English Canada.
No,
right?
And it's because you need to know Quebec, you need to show that you have a link with Quebecers, that you understand them. So that was it could look frivolous, but it's important in the understanding of the province, its culture. So I think there was no big damage done. I don't think it was very shiny as a performance yesterday, but they just wanted to avoid a catastrophe, and they did. And Pierre Poilievre came out fairly calm, less partisan too, when he did his interview. interview. He not even talked about the Liberal Carney lost decade once. He kind of referred to their years indirectly. He also had some cultural references. La Petite Vie, it's a TV show that was very popular in Quebec. So I think he came out the way his advisors wanted him to do. So I don't see a big turn in the road in Quebec with those two interviews.
JD, I watched it, didn't understand a word. But, Pierre Poilievre looked very relaxed. He smiled. He got a bunch of laughs, and Mark Carney, it was a more serious sort of vibe. But, what's your thoughts on how it all went?
That was a good occasion to show your personalities to Quebecers. And that was, to me, like the first interviews of the candidates who are, who want to be Prime Minister of Canada. So I guess this, in terms of personality, I think they came across very well. I would say that Mr. Carney's French, this was the best interview he gave so far, since I've been following him since he became leader of the Liberal Party. His French was adequate, no mistakes, and you could tell that, as my friend Louis just mentioned, he was told to shorten his answers, and they were more to the point. But I would say that I would give a slight edge to Pierre Poilievre at the end of the night. Why? Because Mr. Poilievre managed to talk about issues that are dear to Quebecers, cost of living, the rising cost of housing, and that the last few years made it impossible for people to afford things. And he's proposing change. And I think he wanted also to put to rest that he's a mini Canadian Trump. He was asked bluntly about that. Are you a Trump in Canada? And said, no, we don't have the same origins. I'm a modest family from mère monoparentale, single mother. And then we had trouble making ends meet. So he came across as a simple guy, but this was a time to showcase their personality more than anything else.
Right. The Conservatives are about 24% in Quebec, just under that in our poll tracker. They have 9-10 seats. So there's less for them to lose, a lot for them to gain. But, JD, this sort of is the precursor to the debate on Wednesday night, which, depending on what happens in hockey the next couple of days, could be up against a must-win Montreal Canadian to get into the playoffs game. So Patrice Roy's got to be nervous about that. But JD, what does this tell us? Like, when you look ahead to the debate, what are your expectations for that based on what we saw in Tout-le-Monde-en-Parle?
Well, I think this was a practice for a rehearsal for both leaders. And I think the pressure was immense on Mr. Carney. I mean, I wouldn't want to be in anybody's shoes to be on that show because, as you mentioned, the audience is quite big. The questions can come from nowhere and hit you in the forehead like a 2x4. So you need to be ready. And he was ready. Mr. Carney, as Louis mentioned, managed to name the humorist group Rock et Belles Oreilles. I almost fell off my chair when I heard him say that.
Me too.
It was in his briefing book.
I can imagine.
Because I don't think I don't think three weeks ago, Mr. Carney knew who was Rock et Belles Oreilles.
But so Louis, get your thoughts on the French language debate, and then I'm going to get up and play with them.
I think it's going to be a way more challenging experience for Mark Carney for sure, because all these subjects, Bill 21, Bill 96, will come back as big attacks on him.
And Blanchette will be there.
Yes, and it will be way tougher for him, and he has also to but they have Blanchette and Poilievre. They have to remain prudent, not to hit too hard either, because they might paint him as a victim at the end of the day, and they know that, and they know they have to measure the way they will hit.
There is some natural sympathy right now for Mr. Carney because he's trying to learn more French, and so you got to be.
He's making an honest effort, and people are having some. Okay, look, I want to break down a little bit. This is sort of how the new Quebec ridings with the vote last time overlaid. You can see this is Bloc Québécois blue. This is Conservative blue. But just zero in here, the Greater Montreal area, the Liberals dominate this island, right? You've got two Bloc seats. This is LaSalle that they lost in the by-election. That's the NDP seat. Louis, when you look at this is where the Liberals are trying to push out, right, to the north and south shore of Montreal, and that's where the Bloc are trying to hold. And this could really determine whether that Liberal number on election night begins with a 3 or with a 4, right? Like, what's the dynamic here?
So most of the Liberal potential growth in Quebec is around Montreal, right, North Shore, South Shore, and there's going to be big fights with the Bloc Québécois there, and that's where it's going to happen in Quebec if it has to happen for them in the province. So if you look at ridings on the South Shore like Longueuil-Saint-Hubert, they would want to flip that for sure. Also, La Prairie. That's the Alain Terrien's seat. He's
That's
the House leader for the Bloc.
So that's a big name in the Bloc Québécois.
Yeah, and he is in trouble, and he is knocking right now on thousands and thousands of doors to try and catch up because it won't be easy for him. Also, North Shore, if you look at Terrebonne, if you look at Repentigny, also, it's not safe for the Bloc right now. So these are going to be races that will be very, very symbolic. That's where it needs to happen. And it's important for the Liberals because if they have a potential growth of 10, 15 seats in Quebec, that could help get their majority if they want it. So there's a way through Quebec to get there if something moves elsewhere in the country, but that's where it's going to happen.
So JD, if you look at this, I mean, look, I know the Liberals just lost a by-election in Montreal where the Prime Minister from Montreal was so unpopular he couldn't campaign in Montreal. Things are different now because you got a central banker from Alberta, obviously, and that plays in Montreal better than the Prime Minister did. But you know, the polls right now would suggest the Liberals are going to break out here, right?
Yes.
Like they've got a floor of about 34, 35 seats. Do you think they can get into the 40s with reasonably?
Well, it's a distinct possibility because of the Bloc Québécois support that is going right now to the Liberal Party. And I'm told that the Bloc Québécois candidates and the MPs who are knocking on doors, they're hearing a similar discourse, similar reflections on voters at the doorstep. And it reminds them of 2011. What happened in 2011?
The Orange Wave.
Exactly. What will happen this time? They expect and they fear it might be a red wave this time because of the current context dominated by one person, Donald Trump, who's obviously having a big impact in this campaign.
Okay, this was acting up a bit today, but I want to have a look at the Quebec City area. Oh, see, this is it. There we go.
Always complicated in Quebec City.
Yeah, exactly. But this, look, you know, you've got a couple of Conservatives, and there's between Quebec City and Montreal, we've got Trois-Rivières. There's also the Berthier-Masconanger riding, where Ruth Ellen Brousseau, people would know, is the MP from Vegas.
Yep.
She is coming back to run for the NDP this time.
That's a way to put it.
I mean, when we zoom out, well, she was in Vegas when she won in that Orange Wave, right?
Exactly.
But when we zoom out, I mean, we look at Quebec. I mean, Louis, I know the Gaspésie. This is something like what should we be watching for quickly, sort of beyond that greater Montreal area? Because that's kind of the ball game for the most seats in Quebec.
Yeah, one that we have to look is the Trois-Rivières riding. You know, is it going to flip? It's a three-way race. It's one of the only three-way races in Quebec.
Right there, right?
So
and that's Champagne's riding right there.
Exactly, right on the side. So that could be very symbolic. Berthier-Masconanger, could we see a second NDP MB in Quebec? You know, Alexandre Boulris feels very lonely in the last few years. So that could be another one. And also Quebec City. That's where the Conservatives might try to do some advance in Beauport-Limoilou.
In Trois-Rivières, the former Trois-Rivières mayor is trying for the third time to get elected.
That's Yves Levesque, right?
Yeah, Yves Levesque, exactly. Yeah. And the Conservatives, they feel that this should be a blue riding. So they're putting a lot of effort.
The Liberals lost their candidate there. Right? Remember, they had a candidate in Trois-Rivières who failed to disclose a DUI, a drunk driving conviction in the past. It was dropped.
And they have a candidate from the Outaouais who's running there right now. So a former member, high official in global affairs. Sorry.
Right. But the Outaouais, that's the Ottawa region, right?
Exactly,
That's a long way from Trois-Rivières. I don't know Quebec like you guys do, but that's a tough one for them.
No, and in Trois-Rivières, it's very important to get known in the community and to be a central figure. So maybe he has an edge there.
So it's mainly a battle between the Bloc Québécois and the Conservative Party in that riding.
Yeah. Okay. So just as a last point from each of you, like if you have to guess right now where Quebec goes, I mean, Louis, do you think unless the debate is catastrophic for Mark Carney, they're up? Do they go over 40? Do you think they get to 40 plus right now?
I think if there's one leader who can rebound from the French debate is Yves-François Blanchet.
Exactly.
And remember what happened in the last two elections. At the end of the campaign, he was able to gain some momentum. So that could block the effect of the Liberals at this point. But honestly, what I'm told is that some blockist strategists are very worried because they know that older voters are going to Mark Carney because they're worried about the economy, about their pension and all. So he's fighting against a very strong feeling, insecurity feeling these days. So we'll see where it can go.
Older voters are more likely to vote as well.
Exactly. And last night, Mr. Yves-François Blanchet was very much active on X, trying to sort of criticize the performance of Mark Carney and Monsieur Poilievre on Tout le monde en parle. So I guess he was a bit jealous that he was not there yet.
He's there next week.
He gets last word, though. He gets last word on Tout le monde en parle, right?
But at that time, the jello might be, holding
It might be set.
because it's Easter weekend and people will be talking around ham and whatever.
And the anticipation vote will have started.
Exactly.
Yeah. But, you know, Easter Sunday is a time for resurrections and miracles. So who knows? All right. Louis Blouin and J.D. Bellavance, always appreciate it, Keg. Thanks for being here. All right. Well, CBC News will bring you live coverage of those federal leaders' debates. The French debate will take place on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You can watch that here with simultaneous translation wherever you watch CBC News. And the English language debate is on Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern. You can watch that on CBC Television, CBC News Network, and everywhere that you stream CBC News. Power and Politics will have special pre-debate coverage both days live from Montreal. Well, the NDP were focused on healthcare today. Leader Jagmeet Singh began his day in Toronto announcing his plan to hire more nurses. He then headed to Montreal to prepare for the debates.
Our plan is to hire 35,000 new nurses between now and 2030. We need to hire more nurses. But that's not enough. We don't just need to hire new nurses. We need to respect and retain the nurses we have.
To retain those nurses, Singh is calling for better nurse-to-patient ratios, safer working conditions, and higher compensation. The CBC's Olivia Stefanovich is traveling with the NDP this week. Olivia.
David, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is the last federal party leader to head to Montreal for the debates. He spent the morning here in Toronto, where he unveiled his plan to address nursing shortages. Singh says he wants to hire 35,000 new nurses between now and 2030. And the way he says he'll do it is by forcing the province's hands. Singh is proposing to tie healthcare transfers to nursing retention strategies. He also wants provinces to hire more nurses outside of the country by fast-tracking their accreditation, including those from the U.S. Singh also addressed the NDP's low polling numbers, saying he doesn't believe the data accurately reflects support for New Democrats, pointing to what happened to the NDP in Ontario, which formed official opposition. When asked if he will stay on as leader if his party loses official party status, Singh didn't give a clear answer, only saying that right now his focus is on getting through the election with 2 more weeks to go. David?
All right, Olivia, thank you. This is CBC's Olivia Stefanovich in Toronto. Well, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre doesn't appear to be polling well amongst women. We're going to discuss why that may be. Up next with the hosts of Beyond a Ballot podcast, Amanda Alvaro and Rachel Siegel. Well, throughout this election, we've been seeing a widening gender gap in voting intentions. The latest Angus Reid numbers show the Conservatives leading amongst male voters, with 42% of men saying they intend to vote Conservative this year, compared to 37% of men who say they intend to vote Liberal. But when you look at the women vote and how they intend to vote this election, the gap between Liberals and Conservatives gets a whole lot wider. 44% of women say they intend to vote Liberal, while only 29% of women say they intend to vote Conservative. That is a 15-point gap. To talk about the gender gap and gender issues in this campaign, I want to bring in some familiar faces to the show. Amanda Alvaro is a former Liberal Party communication strategist. Rachel Siegel is a former director of policy in the Stephen Harper government. Of course, you see them on our panels here all the time on Power and Politics. But today, we're going to talk to them in their role as the co-host of the podcast Beyond a Ballot, which is focused on getting more Canadian women into politics. So thanks for being here, gangs. Good to speak with you. Amanda, I know you both started this with that goal in mind, but you know, we're seeing a drop in the number of women candidates. We've seen a lot of women getting out of politics over the past year or so because of the toxicity and threats and abuse. I mean, what's your sense of where this stands, in this campaign?
Yeah, I mean, that is our sense, and that's exactly why we started the podcast, because we felt not only were we seeing fewer women put their name on a ballot and become candidates, but we were also seeing them get turned off entirely by politics at all. So how often were you having dinner table conversations about politics? Very rarely. And part of the reason was because it became so combative and it became so aggressive in the House of Commons that it was impossible to watch. And the nasty rhetoric that was going back and forth between the parties was a huge turnoff for women. So we wanted to start a podcast that would deal with that. And what we're finding is that we are getting women back into the fold. We're getting them more engaged and having more conversations about it. And while I would say that many of the issues that have dominated this campaign have been issues that are equally important to men and women, there's certainly some issues that are either exclusive to women or that women are, that they're more disposed to be a part of. So I think that those issues are important. And I think in the last 2 weeks of the campaign, we see a huge gender gap and divide in this campaign. So whoever can capture that vote or maintain or retain that vote is going to work favorably toward the end goal.
So Rachel, your thoughts on that, on the gender gap? The poll tracker averages, it's about a 15-point gap between the Liberals and the Conservatives. I know there was that viral moment, Leada's Big Daddy, someone shouted at Mark Carney. I don't think that's what's doing it, right? Maybe it is. I mean, what do I know, right? But what's your sense of why that split is so pronounced at this stage in the campaign?
So typically, David, one of the reasons that we wanted to talk to women aged 30 to 45 primarily in this country is because that is the largest swing demographic in this country, meaning that women will often wait until later in the campaign to make an actual decision. And while a lot of people go into campaigns saying, I'm a conservative, I'm a liberal, women often wait to hear what the policies are that come out during each campaign. And so it's really important to us that we provide those women with an opportunity to learn. And in 2019, Statistics Canada actually put out a report saying that women felt they were lacking resources to fully engage with politics in this country. And that's kind of the role that we're trying to play. So as women are sitting around their dinner tables or they're with their family on Easter, they're having these conversations about what's important to them, and they're really trying to make up their mind. We're the ones providing that information to them and trying to make politics just a little more interesting and fun. We have fun.
Well, look, anything you can do to increase participation, awareness, and access, Rachel, I think, that we try to do that on this show. We don't always succeed, but we try, right? But I wonder, though, Rachel, just back to the point, why do you think there is 15 points between the Conservatives and the Liberals? It didn't start that way at the beginning of the year. Trudeau was underwater with everybody, but it is slingshotted back so that Mark Carney has this commanding lead where if you're basically even with men and way ahead with women, well, that's a majority government. Why do you think that split is there?
We've seen historically that women typically vote on more social policies. So one of the things that's also interesting to me is the fact that 12% of women right now are sitting in support of Jagmeet Singh in the NDP, because typically at this point in a campaign, we would see that being higher. In terms of Pierre Poilievre, I mean, women are some women like him, some women don't. The same with Mark Carney. It's just that
Poilievre has come out and talked about a lot of issues and made clear his stance on a lot of issues. We saw him the other day clarifying his position on social issues like abortion. And we're still trying to see how that will play out in the polls and when it comes to talking to women who may have been wondering about some of those positions before deciding to vote for him. So I think we have a couple of more weeks. We're going to see a lot coming out of all of the camps. And like I said, I think women are waiting to see what those positions are that are being put on the table before they ultimately make the final decision.
Yeah, I mean, Amanda, what are your thoughts on that? I don't know how much policy is going to drive this election just because of the specific nature of this election, right? Where Trump just keeps T-boning Canada every 48 hours or so. But why do you think there's this split in the polls right now, Amanda? What's your assessment of it?
Well, I think Rachel touched on some of it. I mean, 3 in 5 women view Poilievre unfavorably. A lot of that unfavorability comes from tone. They view him as combative and aggressive. The style that he used in the House of Commons, the style that he's used for the last 2 years, he's tried to tone it back, but some of that I think really stuck for women. And then while there's issues that men and women equally respond to, whether it's housing or the economic conditions of the country or climate, there are some issues that are exclusive to women, like reproductive rights. And they believe strongly. The Liberals have been unwavering in their support of women's reproductive rights. Carney came out very clearly and said that he would defend the Charter in that way. And in contrast, the Conservatives have been really ambiguous on that topic. The fact that Rachel said that Poilievre had to clarify is one of the issues. So he says he's pro-choice, but he attended pro-life rallies. He has candidates that are really anti-choice, and still he leads a party that allows for free votes on this issue. And while this issue isn't the issue that's dominating the election, the problem is when you look south of the border and you see what could happen to those rights, I think women are particularly concerned. They're going to make sure that whoever they vote for is both going to defend and protect them.
Yeah, and look, Mr. Poilievre, though, has been explicit that no law will be advanced while he is Prime Minister, no matter what, even if a backbencher tries to do it as a private member's bill. So it's important to put that out there because that has not been a part of his politics, so it has been a part of Conservative politics for sure. Rachel, I wonder, not quite a 50-50 cabinet, you know, but pretty close, like it's 1 or 2 seats off. But the candidates running in this election, it's a much lower number, 36% for the Liberals, 32% for the Conservatives. You know, and a lot of women getting out of federal politics and municipal politics especially. You're seeing them just walking away because of what's going on. I mean, when you look at those percentages, I mean, what are your thoughts about what needs to be done to sort of boost that participation in the actual elected life of politics here?
Well, I think we're trying to shift that narrative. We're trying to get women who have never had a touch point in politics to engage with us, to learn to be part of this political community across the country in the hopes that eventually they will put their name on a ballot. And we had this theory that we've spent a lot of time telling women to put their names on a ballot and saying we need more women in our legislatures and our House of Commons, and yet nobody's really provided them with the resources to do that. And so that's what we do on a daily basis. I mean, I'll touch on the debates, David, because we're about to go into those. There's only been 5 times in this country where a woman has stood on the stage, 2 of which have been Elizabeth May. And so there's a big problem. We have amazing women that have run, that hold seats. There's a big still divide between women running, sitting in caucus and then running for leadership. And although to the Liberals' credit, you know, they had 50% of their leadership candidates who were women, ultimately it was a man that won, and that's typically what we see. And so our goal is the long game, is to really encourage women from the beginning all the way to getting women up at the podium debating during the next federal election.
Right. Alexa McDonough, Audrey McLaughlin, and Kim Campbell would have been the others, right? There you go.
That's right.
Amanda, sorry, what's that, Teller?
Very good.
Annemie Paul, the Green Party leader.
That's right. And that was the most recent.
There you go. Forgot about that one. This is Tyler up in the control room, keeping me honest here. All right, Amanda, your just quick thoughts on this, and we got to take a commercial break. But your quick thoughts on what can be done to get more women running. Like it needs to become a safer space, I think, throughout the campaign and afterwards, right?
For sure. I mean, even when you look at things that women are really going to look for in the debates and care about, they're looking for authenticity over polish. Like, do I care? Does this person mean what they say? And they're looking for strength, but not being combative. And I think women need to see that in their elected officials. They need to see that you can have a healthy debate and a dialogue, but that you can have collaboration and respect and empathy for one another. And I think that when we get to a place where we're having conversations that have those things amongst our elected leaders, more women are going to come back into the fold. So that's why we're encouraging that kind of conversation on our own pod and on conversations on CBC. And we hope the more women we get at the table to have these conversations, the more likely they are to put their name on a ballot eventually.
Amanda Alvaro, Rachel Siegel, co-host of Beyond a Ballot podcast, a liberal and a conservative, working together and talking here on the CBC. Thanks, gang. We'll see you again maybe later this week. All right, that's Amanda and Rachel. The Power Rankings panel is here next to talk about the key moments on the campaign trail today, such as Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre proposing mandatory sentences for repeat violent offenders.
The worst mass murderers should never be allowed back on our streets. For them, a life sentence should mean what it says, a life sentence. They should only come out in a box.
Should the notwithstanding clause be used to impose new rules for sentencing? That discussion next. Welcome back to Power and Politics. It's time for our daily Power Rankings. They're here to talk about the key moments on the campaign trail today. I'm joined by Rick Bell, a columnist with Post Media. Rob Benzie is the Queen's Park Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star. And here with me is Stephanie Levitz, a senior reporter with the Globe and Mail. All right. Day 23, folks, the campaign. Party leaders talking about the Conservative proposal to use a notwithstanding clause to crack down on repeat violent offenders.
I will use Section 33 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to put an end to the Liberal crime and drug wave.
I think this is a very dangerous step. We have a Charter of Rights and fundamental freedoms in this country.
Charter rights, human rights should not be things that we are willing to ignore or put to the side.
You should rely more on improving justice system and laws.
All right, Steph, let's start with you. Pierre Poilievre has talked about using the notwithstanding clause before only in cases of legal issues like this, like criminal justice is what they say. How do you think this affects things on the campaign trail?
For Mr. Poilievre, it's a reiteration of something he said in 2022 when the Supreme Court decision he referenced today came out in the first place. He promised he'd use the notwithstanding clause. Bringing it back now on the campaign trail, reiterating that promise, it's a political wedge issue, right? It's to continue this idea that he's trying to convince people that the current crime rates in this country, are exactly the responsibility of the Liberal government, and matters like this will solve it. It's absolutely worth noting, though, that you can't do this retroactively. So the murderers that he's referencing that are being locked up that he made reference to in his announcement, this would not apply to them. So it's a bit of that funny announcement where it makes it sound like he's taking action on something that is a problem today, but really this would have to be a proactive thing for any mass murderers convicted in the future.
Right, so Paul Bernardo gets to keep having his bail hearings, for example. These sorts of things, even with this. Rick, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, you're right. It's going into the future, but I think it highlights in a campaign where often policy, we don't talk as much about that because we're talking about Trump, and Trump all the time. This is not just for his base, but I think there are a lot of people who feel the criminal justice system is an unjust system. I don't think they're going to be so much debating in the coffee shops about the niceties of the notwithstanding clause, despite what was said by the people in the clip before this segment. So I think it's personally it's good. I think it's going to again energize his base, and it's going to focus the message on crime and dealing more harshly with criminals. And when people hear this stuff about, and we've got to look at different ways of doing this, they've heard that. They've heard that for 10 years, 20 years. I think a lot of people, not just conservatives, are tired of hearing that any longer. They think something has to be done. So I think they will perceive this as something. We can debate the niceties, but I think there is common consensus. We've got to do something beyond the sweet words of a certain ivory tower folks.
Okay. Well, Benzie, on that, I mean, the niceties are the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, though, right? So, this is a thing when you are dealing with the Constitution. It's not something you should do lightly, and that's the pushback on this today, right?
Yeah, and remember, this is reviving a Harper-era law from 2011 that was struck down 11 years later as unconstitutional. So, but I think Rick's got a point. This is good politics. Especially at a time when Mr. Poilievre's party seems to be struggling a little bit. So I think for them, it's the kind of thing that gets their base revved up. And if the election on April 28th turns on things like crime and issues like that, then it's probably going to turn out in the favor of the Conservatives. Unfortunately for them, so far this election is not about crime or drugs or anything like that. It's all about Donald Trump and tariffs and the economy. And I think that's why Mr. Poilievre is wanting to talk about this today. And I think it's probably smart on his part to do so.
Well, Rob, and this brings us to your pick because someone who says this is about Donald Trump and the economy is Corey Tenike, who is Doug Ford's campaign manager. And he has been, let's just say it, a relentless critic of this campaign. And Doug Ford was asked about this today. And he could have chosen to skip over it, but he didn't. He leaned into it. Listen to the Premier of Ontario.
He's tough as nails, but he's the best campaign manager in the country. And to be very frank, if Corey was running that campaign, I don't think Mr. Poilievre would be in the position he's in right now. But it's still a lot of time left. We still have debates. At the end of the day, the people will decide which way they want this country to move forward. But sometimes the truth hurts.
The truth hurts, Benzie. Why do you think Doug Ford decided to answer that question the way Doug Ford answered that question?
Well, you know, David, I was actually surprised, and along with Steph, Steph, when she worked for the Star, she and I did many stories on the tensions between Poilievre and Ford Tories, and now I have to do them myself. Steph, I miss you so much. But it is an interesting schism, I guess. And yeah, Mr. Ford could have stayed out of it, but he's not wrong in the sense that Mr. Tank is a very successful political strategist. He has won 3 elections in a row for Mr. Ford, increasing the popular vote tally in each election, which is unheard of. So I think when Mr. Tank speaks out publicly and says, look, they have picked the wrong frame for the election to talk about issues like, well, whatever, maybe crime and other things, but Corey was more critical of things like them talking about the World Economic Forum when they should have been talking about Donald Trump. And he speaks from experience because on February 27th, Mr. Ford was reelected by speaking about Donald Trump. If the election in Ontario had been about healthcare, he might have been reelected. It wasn't. It was about Donald Trump and tariffs.
Well, Steph, Benzie doesn't have you to help him with these stories anymore, but he's got Corey tonight and Doug Ford, right? So it's not, no offense, Rob, it's not that hard when they got stuff like that happening. But, you know, Doug Ford is not doing anything to help the federal Conservatives in this election. Like, he's kind of making it harder for them. Am I reading this wrong?
I mean, by not doing anything, he is making it harder for them, right?
Yes, and then he does stuff like this.
He makes the choice to weigh in at this moment. If Doug Ford had quietly signaled to all of his people, let's say, listen, let's help. Let's get them. The polls are tanking for them in Ontario. Go out, knock the doors, send your people, help raise the money. He just sort of said, I don't know, you want to help them, help them. I'm not going to say yes, I'm not going to say no. You know, you had Nick Kouvalis, who's another key ally of Doug Ford's, an operative, out on social media sort of laying out the feud, some of the bad blood that exists with Pierre Poilievre Conservatives refusing to help Doug Ford in elections, Doug Ford Progressive Conservatives helping Poilievre. This is bad blood.
Having the big rally.
The big rally.
The Poilievre campaign used for their ads on advance voting weekend in Ontario.
And, you know, seen as bad political form, right? I mean, did it hurt them? They won anyway. But the point here, though, is that to air all of this in bad form, I mean, the Conservatives always joke that they're the party of transparency. I don't think they meant this much transparency about their feelings. And it just doesn't look good, and especially because Doug Ford is tremendously popular, right? He's popular amongst the very same voters that Mr. Poilievre needs in his corner. And if Doug is going to come out and kneecap him like that, well, the people who are like, well, if Doug trusted him, maybe I'd trust him, and now they won't.
Well, Rick, it is transparent. It seems to me it is. I mean, what are your thoughts on this? A bit of deja vu as an Alberta guy.
And I think, you know, we're talking about bad blood. There is bad blood because a lot of Conservatives don't believe that Premier Ford is a Conservative. Now, that might not be good politics in this election campaign when he just got reelected and Ontario is the big prize. But I think it'll be interesting to see how this story actually plays out. And I've often wondered with this advice about he should have done something differently. He should have concentrated less on the issues that got him as far as he got him, and Poilievre should, in fact, do Trump, Trump, and Trump. What is it exactly, and I've said this before, what is it exactly he was supposed to say? I mean, when you have a prime minister who's talking about annexation of Canada by the United States, when he's talking about Trump wants to break us so he can own us, what exactly is as powerful or more powerful than that? I'm just not sure.
Well, Daniel Smith goes to the U.S. and does U.S. media.
This is payback.
I
don't know what the effect of this will be if people realize this is payback. They're not happy with Poilievre, so they come out in the campaign with 2 weeks to go. And number one, there was the trashing of the strategy publicly, and now there's the trashing of the Conservative leader. I just don't know. Maybe this will prove to be positive for Carney and he'll win more seats in Ontario. But if Premier Ford and Corey have any, let's say, aspirations to be part of what was broadly known as the Conservative movement, I don't know what the future of that is really.
Yeah, well, look, we got to move on because we only got about 7 minutes. I think there's a lot of stuff that they could have gone on the airwaves. No Conservatives went on U.S. media at all, even to this day, on any level to defend Canada in this. And they could have built relationships with the provincial parties, right? I think there's going to be a postmortem on that sort of stuff when we get through it. But look, we got 7 minutes. I got 2 topics. There is some overlap. So I think what we're going to do is mash Rick and Steph together if we can, because you both want to talk about the Liberals and their buttons, and Rick wants to talk about the poll. So Steph, I'll let you go with the buttons, and then Rick on the Ipsos poll, and we'll sort of have a round on it.
Yeah, I was thinking in my head, maybe what the Conservatives needed were buttons. I mean, maybe they just didn't have enough buttons, and buttons could have solved the Trump problem, because that's what the Liberals operatives seem to think,
so
right?
Sloppy. So sloppy.
So sloppy, so juvenile, so beneath the time that we're in, and all of these calls from the Liberals that we need more civility in our politics. You could just sort of go on, and Mr. Carney's sort of basic dismissal of it. I mean, I know he said he apologized and it wasn't right, but to reassign the staff.
They're off the silly button committee.
Yeah.
Maybe they're on the silly hat committee.
I mean,
I have no idea.
I don't really get it. And I think that, the Liberals have worked overtime in this campaign to try and link the Poilievre Conservatives to Donald Trump, to link Mr. Poilievre explicitly to Donald Trump. And this, setting aside the validity of any of that argument, doing this is just really, guys, like, come on, you do this at political conventions. You can do this. I've been in situations where you've seen opposing parties like outside of news conferences, handing out glasses of orange juice in the days of, the Harper cabinet minister who had to quit about that, or, little stunts like that. Preston Manning and his mariachi band in the House of Commons, for God's sakes. But you don't try and misinformation your way into this campaign.
Yeah, the Tonight Burn button is like standard kind of trolling. Stop the steal. Even Liberals are like, what are we doing? We shouldn't be at that. Rick, your thoughts on this and what you see as a sign of hope in a poll from Ipsos for the Conservatives here?
Well, first off, just one sentence on the buttons. Surprise, 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 not. They talk about Trump, Trump, Trump all the time. Of course they've got to have operatives that want to have now buttons yet again talking about Trump, Trump all the time. And all the time. So that's where we've got that. As far as polls go, there's 2 polls, Angus Reid and Ipsos, and it shows a little bit of a sign, a glimmer of hope for the Conservatives. I've talked to some Conservative operatives who are feeling more optimistic, not just by the polls, but by the fact that Trump hasn't said 51st state lately. Trump hasn't, I don't think, openly maligned Canada in the way he has in the past lately. And if the emphasis goes away, they've got 2 weeks, if the emphasis even goes away somewhat, back toward cost of living and other issues, and away from all Trump all the time, then that's where their hope is, because that's where not only their base is, but that's what their campaign is. I don't think you're going to see Poilievre change that much. I think the hope is that if Trump doesn't start going as wild as he was not so many weeks ago, with regards to Canada, that people might look back and think, hey, the Liberal record, terrible, and the issues of cost of living and other issues are actually important to me. So there's at least a glimmer of hope. I think the people that I've talked to feel better now than they did 3 or 4 days ago. So we'll see where that goes. But it's not over yet, in other words.
Right.
It's not over yet.
No, but 2 points on that. That Ipsos poll, if you model it out, it's still a 190-plus seat Liberal majority, right? Like there is some tightening, but there's still that gap. And Lisa Raitt, who was on the show earlier, is texting me, and I'll add some context. No Conservative MPs went on any of the U.S. shows, and Pierre Poilievre didn't. Stephen Harper and John Baird did, and some premiers did, of course. Danielle Smith, Scott Moe,
and she was called a traitor. She was called a traitor.
Well, sometimes it's not where you say it can be what you say. I've never called Danielle Smith a traitor, but she did dig some holes for herself. But no federal Conservatives did. Benzi, your thoughts on your thoughts on the button and the data.
I first bravo to Kate McKenna for paying attention, that doing what good reporters do, and you're in the bar with the operatives and you're listening to what they say.
Amen.
And you're finding stuff out, and that is good reporting. And bravo to Kate and bravo to the CBC for breaking the story, because CBC takes a lot of heat from the Conservatives, much of it unfairly, I think. As you may have noticed, David, much of it unfairly, and I think I thought it was a little kind of cute for the Conservatives to be sending out emails about CBC reports. So bravo to Kate. I think that Carney is wrong. I think he should have fired the operatives, and it makes me wonder how high up they are in the war room that they weren't fired. Because if there's just a couple of kids that were overzealous and being stupid, then you could have thrown them to the wolves without any problem. I just think it caused him some headache, and if it comes up in the debate on Wednesday or Thursday, then they're going to say we really should have fired them.
Look,
it was just not worth the headache.
It's not kids. I mean, I don't know for sure who it was, but the people who do this sort of thing in the war room are people who in the government have six-figure jobs. So we got a bunch of liberals emailing saying, why are you talking about this? It's like, well, it's because people who hold government jobs where they're paid six figures to advise ministers and the prime minister are doing stuff to promote distrust in the election. And I know there's all these other right-wing groups out there on social media doing their things. This is the war room. These are people in the employ of the government outside of the campaign and of the Liberal Party in the campaign. So, Steph, you know, that's my defense of why we're talking about it. But on the polling, just on Rick's point, like there is slight movement there on the issue set, but this is locked into a 6-7 point national lead, and Atlantic regionals, Quebec regionals, Ontario regionals, and BC regionals show a pretty solid Liberal position at this point. It's not moving the way Pierre Poilievre needs it to move.
You know, the interesting thing, and the Conservatives will say this, and they talk your ear off about it, right, is that objectively speaking, Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives are polling at a wonderful number, right? It is a great number for them. Majority governments have been formed with this number. And the issue is, you know, before you were talking to JD and Louis about like the Bloc Québécois and what's happening there and that collapse in Quebec. And then what about the New Democrats?
Right?
Like, you know, it's the Conservatives, and I know they can't do this, right? But you would think, like, how could they help them? You know, help me, help you, Jerry Maguire styles. Like, because without that boost, especially with the New Democrats, especially in Ontario, setting aside everything Doug Ford said, without the New Democrats rising in Ontario, the Conservatives will be hard-pressed to pick up seats, no matter how many times the issue set is the issue set for people living in Ontario, for people living in Greater Vancouver, the Lower Mainland.
Okay.
That's the problem.
We got to leave it there because we're out of time, but you're not wrong. Steph Levitz, Rick Bell, Rob Benzie, always good to see you. And CBC News will bring you live coverage of federal leaders' debates later this week. French debate, Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern. Watch that with simultaneous translation wherever you watch CBC News. The English debate, Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern, and we'll have a pre-show in Montreal both those days. That's it for me. Back in 22 hours.